that just get to remind those of you who aren't scientists, most of the drugs that we have now are poisons. They work by blocking a receptor, by blocking a channel, by stopping something that normally happens from happening.
Certain central nervous system is in our brain, highly integrated, extraordinarily complex. Peripheral nerves are stemming from the brain through various proceeds and go, for instance, through the vagus nerve that you have described, and then branch into organs more and more specifically. And our concept is to understand, read the electrical language that nerves, just as they come to the spleen or to the muscle of controlling our lungs or into the pancreas or into our GI tract, get to that nerve, read what they're telling our organ, and if we read that something is wrong, correct it. And do that through microchips or nanochips that we would implant on that nerve, have them very local, so they need to be very close to the organ, and very specific by definition because they're very local, but also because they only correct when they read something is wrong, they would be temporally specific. And there would be no compliance issue because they would be there with the patients all. So we decided to actually foster this scientific field, become the integrator, create an open innovation approach. We created a prize. We put hundreds of scientists from all continents together in a meeting. Francis, you were there, and you were there too, Kevin, and really tried to advance this field. We have opened this completely, so intellectual property, etc., is the property of the world and of the scientific field. And enormous progress has been made over the past year and a half since we had that meeting. I can tell you that today in GlaxoSmithKline we decided that these medicines, these therapeutic interventions, will be a reality. I can't tell you when, probably in the next 5 to 10 years. They will be a reality. I can tell you how often they will be used. There are some challenges that we still have to fix, but they will treat chronic disorders. We have demonstrations in many, many animal models I'll be happy to share. We have also advanced I call it the hardware, the engineering of the nanochips and all the powering issues, etc.
Well, it's great to be here in Aspen and a privilege to be on the panel with Mansoor and Kevin and to have John, who seems to be afflicted by something, as our capable moderators.
It's hyperreactive airway syndrome. I think you all know it. The bugs are dead. It's just an allergic reaction to their carcasses.
Okay. With the appropriate bioelectronic medicine, you can probably control that. With Mansoor and Kevin and to have John, who seems to be afflicted by something, as our capable moderators.
It's hyper. By the end of this, people may want to just be zapping me.
I'm an internist. One of the most sort of satisfying and dramatic moments you have as a doc working in the emergency room, which I used to do a lot of, is when somebody rolls in the emergency room door who is faint, lightheaded, and has a very rapid pulse. And it turns out they have something called paroxysmal atrial tachycardia, a rapid form of heartbeat that's not terribly dangerous. It's not like VTAC, but it is very uncomfortable if you're in the middle of it. And it is possible, if all goes well for you, that you have that person simply lie down on the gurney and reach in and press with just the right amount of pressure right here on the carotid artery. And within a minute, you can break that tachycardia and that person is back to a normal rhythm. And you feel like a magician. How does that work? Now, the problem is that in the carotid body and in the rest of the peripheral nervous system, our descriptions of exactly what's going on there are pretty rudimentary. If you go to Wikipedia, which I just did for fun of it, and looked up the vagus nerve. So what's the vagus nerve? Vagus nerve is one of the cranial nerves, comes out of the brain. It's cranial nerve number 10. And it is probably the big daddy here when it comes to what we're talking about today, because it carries a lot of this parasympathetic kind of signal, the kind of thing that maybe is involved in the immune system, is involved in gastric contractility, is involved in blood pressure, and so on. The vagus for wandering, by the way, because it wanders all over the place after it leaves the brainstem. It's got all these branches. Go to Wikipedia and look it up. All the diagrams look like they were drawn in 1920.
They were.
Because they were. Yeah. And we haven't gotten past that. We can sort of maybe say what the path of the various branches is, and it's pretty clear that they're not quite all the same in everybody, so we have a personalized medicine issue here as well, just got to say that. But what we really need if we're going to try to understand how to intervene is a much more sophisticated way to measure what's going on there. And that means getting the anatomy squared away, the neuroanatomy. And that is, in fact, going to require a lot of technology that we are starting to invent, but we have work to do. That vagus nerve is not a nerve. It's actually within it hundreds of thousands of individual nerves that are going to different places, some of them sending signals, some of them receiving signals. If you really wanted to understand the system, what you'd like to have is a technology, this is our dream, that you would wrap around that nerve that would actually sample everything that's going on there without interfering, that would both be able to read what's happening and also send messages to change what's happening. And do that for the individual because there are going to be differences you might want to have to tune. That's going to take an incredible advance in nanotechnology to be able to do that. But there are engineers and neuroscientists that are champing at the bit to get there. So I give Kevin and Moncef a lot of credit for getting the idea of this bioelectronic medicines initiative together, and Moncef putting resources from a private company into this effort and then insisting that everything has to be open access. That doesn't happen all the time, and I think should be very much applauded. And we did, in fact, at that meeting a year and a half ago, conclude that it's time to really make a push here, and this is a place where NIH can make a contribution. We have something called the Common Fund, which is a part of our budget, which is intended to tackle projects that no single part of our institution could handle, but it might benefit across the board quite widely, and this seemed like a great example of that. So we have initiated a program called SPARK.
And this is where we enter the subject of AllSpark mutation, a deliberate or unintentional way to reanimate Earth's machinery as transformers by the AllSpark.
It's not the greatest acronym, SPARC. You can get the electricity feeling here, but when you find out what it stands for, it's a bit of a stretch. It's stimulating peripheral activity to relieve conditions. SPARC. I'm sorry, it's the best we could do. We're government people, you know, give us a break. I got to say, our colleagues in DARPA are also engaged in this, the Department of...
You've got this human genome project. We know what people's genomes are. Now you got to match it up to phenotype, you know, so what's going on in their lives. And these gizmos and maybe this technology can help us have databases. I know that's a scary word, databases of health, which help us put it all together and figure out, you know, what's going to happen to who, what should we do when. But of course, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the topic that I'm sure all of you are thinking right now, which is you're hearing about chips implanted in bodies. So I've got to ask you, Kevin, and then we'll flip it to the audience. Any possibility of people hacking into other people's neurological systems and causing mischief? Not that anybody has that type of mentality in our planet.